Good morning, Harley. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't do this on the regular day. We were tied up a little bit with some business associates, and I know we talked about doing the compost tea episode, and I just didn't have the time to prepare all that. So we'll try to get into that next week.
Okay. Same time, same station. Wednesday
Th-
morning.
There we go. That's the plan. That's the plan. Um, yeah. So in the meantime, the gentleman that were here, we spent a lot of time talking about how are we going to grow crops if nitrogen is not available? And that
Mm.
was a big topic of discussion. And when you look at the that's such a broad question because we're so used to just going out and buying what we need or sourcing what we need. What if that goes away or what if that's not available? How are we going to do that? So it's very interesting conversations, and maybe me and you can just touch on that topic for a minute because it's so fresh in my head.
Okay. Yeah, one of nitrogen is one of the limiting factors in soil because there aren't any minerals, there aren't any rocks in the soil that contain nitrogen. Nitrogen is just the byproduct of organic material. It's nitrogen is part of proteins, and when the plants die and they start to compost, microorganisms break down the proteins into amino acids. Then the amino acids are converted into different forms of nitrogen, and then they build up new plant material. So nitrogen is a limiting factor in soil in general, unless you have good organic matter. And I think that would be the very first thing to talk about if you want to talk about growing crops
Yeah.
without a lot of extra nitrogen, is make sure you have at least 4 to 10% organic matter in your soil. Uh, my target is about 5 to 7% as a minimum. I don't know what you see for that, but if you're going to add organic matter, you're going to have some compost or some other sources of organic matter.
Yeah, good point. The organic matter. And as we were talking about this, we were looking at let's just take Mother Earth, and we looked how does Mother Earth keep producing their crops in the same place every year? There's no crop rotation, there's no fertility. So if you want to refer to, I refer it as God's crops, okay, or Mother Earth's crops, things like that. And I think it directly ties into what you're saying, the organic matter. And on that topic of the minerals, nitrogen is one of the few elements you can grow. You can produce it. So if you get some seeds, a lot of clovers, some legumes, peas, alfalfa, things like that, if you have those seeds and if you plant that in a plot of ground, an area of ground, whatever you have, let those plants grow and produce. And if you actually cut them before they seed and turn them back into the soil, you can use that for your next planting as a slow release nitrogen source. So that kind of
Hmm.
ties in directly what you're saying about the organic matter. So we're increasing the organic matter naturally and letting the microbes uh, and digest the organic matter and things like that to produce that nitrogen in the soil. And it's a we're kind of accelerating a system, or we're kind of preparing for the next crop when we do that because we're not going to harvest the crop we planted. That was one of the general topics that we talked about, and it's very interesting if you think about that. You can actually grow nitrogen for your next crop. And so
Hmm.
in organics, a lot of organic farms, that's a question we get all the time, like how am I going to grow these crops without nitrogen? I don't have compost available. I'm in the middle of Timbuktu or wherever. There's no manure, there's no compost. Well, we're going to have to think ahead, maybe 1 or 2 years, and plant cover crops that produce nitrogen, turn that into the soil. That's a good way to start. But that's an interesting topic.
It is. And you just touched on it. The key there is the microbes in the soil because it's the microorganisms that fix the nitrogen from the air. They take nitrogen gas, literally, some of them, the azose types of
Mm-hmm.
microorganisms, the
Yeah.
free living, the rhizobium, which are the ones you have in the beans, soybeans, and so forth. Um, they take nitrogen out of the air, they change it into ammonium form of nitrogen, and then other microorganisms change the ammonium into nitrites, nitrites into nitrates, and then the plant takes it up. So you're right, those microorganisms are manufacturing nitrogen fertilizer, and they're doing it right on the roots of the plant. So we can harvest the power of nature. Biofertilizers,
Yes.
especially for the third world nation. Biofertilizers are
Right.
strong in microorganisms, and you have to have the right team. But I will say this, though, with that, um, before I forget, I don't remember what year it was. I think it was 2012. I was doing my classes on microbes. And I found out that year that Michigan State University came up with a microbial blend to use in the farms that were able to reduce the nitrogen in field production by 50%, cut it in
Wow.
half. In fact, that year they won first place in Green Technology Award from Popular Science magazine for having that blend, because that alone, if you don't add that extra nitrogen fertilizer, you don't get the runoff. Nitrates run off really easy. That's why it's hard, even in looking at organic books. Nitrogen is so volatile, Brandon. I mean, you have to have a snapshot because the temperature's high, or they make a lot of nitrates, the microbes are really working, and then you get a rain that washes it away. So if it's cooler temperatures, it'll build up. If it's warmer temperatures, it builds down. So you can only do snapshots of it. But but the microbes are the key. You have free living nitrogen fixing bacteria too that will take that out of the air, change it into fertilizer. Now we do the same process to make fertilizer. We take nitrogen out of the air, but the way we do it is we take nitrogen out under high temperature, not room temperature, and at high pressure. And so every time the price of oil goes up, the price of nitrogen fertilizer goes up. So if we can cut that back, even here in the United States where it's easy to get it, hey, it's going to save money to the farmers, and we're going to grow healthier plants.
Oh man, you're nailing it on this one. I appreciate that. And that study you brought up with the microbes, that should be uh, that should be a staple for any type of agronomic production. It's just why that's not more, circulated more or used more as a reference or things like that. That's a catastrophe because you nailed it on that one. And on that topic, that leads us into the thing we want to do with the compost teas and things like that. We'll get to that podcast
Mm-hmm.
when we get to it, but that goes right along the lines you're talking of. And when you were talking about the nitrogen runoff, the importance
Mm-hmm.
of these cover crops uh, and plant matter that we turn back into the soil, the nitrogen is right there stored. It's sequestered. It's stored. It's bioavailable. It has no salt. It gets no better than that because it's sitting there and the soil goes to work. The microbes eat it up. And if we look at that process, it's kind of like how a stomach works in our body.
Mm-hmm.
The soil is very closely related to how our, the system in our own bodies work. And the more we look at that and realize that, we need to be cautious of what we feed the soil. Is
Mm-hmm.
this good for the soil? We know a lot of things we apply are good for plants, but is it good for the soil at the same time? And that leads us right back to all these biostimulants and you know, uh, just soil accelerating things we can do to help digest that organic matter. Great point.
Yeah. And you talk about plants sequestering the nitrogen, holding on to it so they can
Yeah.
do the cover crops. You know what? Microbes do the same thing. Bacteria in the root zone, they literally sequester nitrogen. And bacteria in the soil rarely die of old age. Those bacteria that they're making nitrogen available and eating it for their own use, the bacteria are eaten by protozoa. and other microorganisms in the soil. And when they do, the protozoa digests the bacteria. It uses some of that nitrogen for its own needs, and then it spits out the excess. And that excess nitrogen it spits out, hey, that's plant available nitrogen again. So it's holding on to the nitrogen. The bacteria themselves that live on the root zone, the whole rhizosphere, is a sponge for holding on to nitrogen. And that's a great plan for nature because the plants die back at the end of the year, the microbes go to sleep, the seeds fall to the ground, the next spring they start to grow again, the microorganisms start to thrive again because they have some sugar to eat from the plants, and the cycle starts again next year without our help. And it's been doing it that way for millions of years, preserving, recycling the nitrogen from year to year. Yeah, and one more thing I'll say about that too. I just thought about it with the roots, right? The roots die back at the end of the year if you don't pull them out, and then the next year the water tends to follow the same paths where the roots were last year because it's kind of made channels in the soil. So as the rain comes in and washes over there, some of the leftover organic matter from the roots is available for the microbes, and they can build and start making new roots.
Yeah, there's a lot going down in there in that soil. So with that, with your experience in hydroponics,
Hmm.
what is the best way to get some of that microbial action doing those beneficial things in hydroponics as it does in the soil? What's been your experience?
Okay. Well, with hydroponics, we're taking a shortcut because we're giving the plant nitrogen already giving it in the nitrate form or the ammonium. Usually in my nutrients, about 90% of the nitrogen is in the form of nitrates and no more. Sorry, cat's bothering me. Um,
Yeah, I got my dog right here trying to get into it.
go see mom. Go see mom. Okay.
We should probably hold your
90%.
cat up and my dog up and see what happens. No, that would be a good
That might
podcast.
be that might be the end of the podcast, but we'll get a lot of views. That's for sure. Yeah. So about 90% is nitrates, no more than 10% ammonium form, and then the plant takes up the nitrates and so forth. So it's already in that we don't need the microbes to change ammonium into nitrate. It's already done for us. It's in the form the plant needs. Um, but I will say this that we don't want to overdo it with nitrogen and hydroponics either. One of the cool things about recirculating systems, though, is that you're capturing the runoff. It's not just washing down below the roots or washing into the rivers. It goes past the roots of the plant, then it goes back to the reservoir, and then it's pumped back to the roots again. All we need to do is replenish the nitrogen that the plant took out. And so that is actually very good for the environment. So if you even in a third world country, as long as they had a source of electricity and a source of relatively clean water and some stock solution salts, they can make those fertilizers, stretch them so they go a long ways because they're using it over and over again.
and and benefit your production per square foot in
Right,
hydroponics as well.
right. Now you're not going to grow your corn, your rice, your soybeans in hydroponics. It's just not practical. But your vegetables and some of your high nutrition vegetables, your
Mhm.
your peppers, your tomatoes, your herbs that you like to use in your cooking, you can grow those just on the top of your roof, even in a third world company, as long as you can pump the water to the roots and be able to collect it when it's done. It's just it's an adjunct. You're not going to feed the world that way, but you can add to the nutritional value and feed your family that way and your community.
Good point. Yeah, good point. And I hope the more we do this and the more we talk about these subjects, people will really start to think about, how are we going to get some nutritious vegetables or, nutritious, leafy greens and things like that. Well, in the comfort of one's own home, that could be a very highly productive area to do a hydroponic setup if you have water and electricity. And uh, I think we all need to think about that a little bit more. And and it's also fun to do. And you can do that on a small scale, a large scale, a learning scale, a hobby scale, whatever you want. And it's just fun to do.
I was thinking about that too in the past, as far as third world nations. They don't have access to, you know, to a hydroponic store down the street where they can buy their nutrient solution. But if they were able to, the families were able to make their own little hydroponic systems, you could have a central point in the community where the stock solutions were made, and the residents could come over there with a gallon jug, fill up with the stock solution, and take that back, and they could live off of that with vegetables for months. 1 gallon of concentrated nutrient solution from a central position could make 200 gallons of of uh, of nutrients, full strength nutrients, and you're recirculating that and recycling that too. So you only might have to take your 30-gallon reservoir. You might only need a pint of the solution, right? But you're not gonna need another pint for at least a couple of weeks. Just top off with water in between. So it could be done with some planning to be able to support the urban areas in, when you're not going to have a lot of soil to work with, and then have working with replenishing the soil out in the rural areas, the surrounding communities.
Wow. Yeah. They're just, the more you think about this, the further your mind goes. And that leads me to another experience I've had in Puerto Rico. I was in Puerto Rico uh, doing some business work and with customers and things like that. And there was a hydroponic setup, very small, that ran off solar. So the pump ran off solar. So it didn't
Hmm.
recirculate all the time, but it ran off
Mm-hmm.
solar. And what they were producing were just herbs and greens and things like that, things that grow rapidly, don't require a lot of nutrition to grow, and that they can harvest sometimes every 2 days, and it keeps replenishing and replenishing and replenishing. And so that was a valuable resource there for them because it was at their home. There were some adjustments they had to make, and what we found out is the water was getting too warm, the recirculation
Mm-hmm.
water. So we had to do a lot of the piping and the reservoir and things like that, make sure it was in the shade, just to help get
Right.
some additional cooling and things like that. So what you just described, I've seen that personally on a smaller scale. It was very interesting, and that was a staple in their home. Uh, the entire the everybody that lived in that home uh, knew how to harvest and operate, and their schedules and when they need to go. And I looked at that and I thought, you know what? That would be so easy to do in every household that was had any interest in knowing where their food comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Very
I like
interesting.
that
No
idea because,
pesticides, nothing like that. Yeah.
yeah, you could. I have a little solar setup station. Haven't set it up because I wanted to set something up off the grid. Something back in the back corner of my garden where I could have kind of like a fountain, but the fountain, instead of being a fountain, it's going to be a hydroponics. And the good idea about the solar, you just thought, is when you have a bright sunny day, that's when it's going to pump the most water because you have the most light. And that's when the plant needs the most. If you have a cool, overcast day, maybe it's not pumping as much, but the plant doesn't need as much. So that's kind of a good idea there to be able to incorporate that if you're off the grid. So really, as long as you have your solar station, which will last for years, your solar collector and a solar pump, you don't even need access to electricity. Good point, Brandon.
Yeah. Great, great topic. It's interesting how where we go when we get together and just talk. I mean, sometimes we have an agenda and things like that, but as we get discussion, in discussions of topics, you never know where it's going to lead us. This is
Mhm.
fun.
Yeah. Hey, another thing that's fun to me that we hardly ever talk about, outdoor hydroponics. Have you ever tried outdoor hydroponics?
Not me personally, but we have plenty of customers that are doing that.
Mm-hmm. There's no substitute for sunlight. So I remember one year I did a row of tomatoes in front of my garage. It was in Rockwell. So it was a 24-foot row of tomatoes with one reservoir. And then I did it right in front of the garage. So I sent down strings, just like you'd set up nails for Christmas tree lights. I put my strings down. And as the
Okay.
tomatoes were growing, I used vine clips and clipped them up. I had this massive wall of tomatoes from that one little system. And literally, there were a couple of times during the year where complete strangers stopped their cars, came up, knocked on my door, and said, I drove by your house. And, I'm sorry to bother you, but I drove by your house on Tuesday and your plants were this big. And I drove by on Thursday and they were this big. Do you mind? What are you doing? And I showed him, yeah, if you have sunlight, you have the nice breeze, good southern exposure, your hydroponic system. Usually I would like you said, I would bury the reservoir, or in this case, I just put it in the shade. Um, it is incredible. I did one hydroponic system outdoors in a parking lot one time for NFT, nutrient film technique to grow basil. And I'm not exaggerating. I did 15 batches of pesto over the summer. It was that productive with the sunlight. Sometimes in 2 or 3 days at the most, it would I'd be down to zero in my reservoir because it was taking up so much water and nutrients. And I checked the bottom there, that last inch on the bottom of the reservoir, the EC was just as high as when I started. So they were
Oh
taking up
wow.
water and nutrients at the exact same rate.
Wow.
Wow is right. Wow is right. So in fact, I got so sick and tired of making pesto. Toward the end there, I said, I'm going to chop these down just that high. A week later, they're 6 inches high, 12 inches high again. So outdoor hydroponics, I think that's underlooked at it. Just along a fence row or in front of your house or in the back part of a garden. It's going to be way more productive than that same space and soil.
Good point. And that just sparked a thing. We have a customer down the road that's doing that. He's got a an outdoor hydro leaned up against his house. He comes in and talks to us all the time, and I need to go take a visit. And he shares some of the same sentiments that you did when he comes in, and he's like, I cannot believe what's going on. And
Yeah.
it may, if you think about it, um, especially where we're located, we have such a short growing season, and he can get such a head start. And he's got the nutrients and the sunlight, and the nutrients are exchangeable, and the uh, uh, it's such an easy garden for this customer. And he talks about that all the time, just how easy this is compared to doing the backyard stuff, and for his production. And you and I both know that you can get very nutritious food in hydroponics
Mm.
if people would take your classes and learn what you're trying to teach them. You can get very nutritious crops in hydroponics. That's a misconception. It's a misconception
Hmm.
that they're not as healthy, they're not as good for you and things like that. But if people would understand what you're teaching them, they could really dial that in and get a very, very nutritious end result.
Oh yeah, yeah. I can double the lycopene of tomatoes, so they're red all the way through. I can increase vitamin C in tomatoes by 50% just with the nutrients alone. Now here's the thing though. If you really want nutrient dense, you need to go beyond just the basics. You're going to want some biostimulants. You get something like fulvic acid and kelp, just those two alone, or humic acid and kelp in your hydro. You're adding 62 beneficial trace elements to it, to your nutrient solution. The plants will take those up. And when they take up some of those beneficial elements, they don't need them to grow, but they'll stimulate the plant to make more antioxidants. And we need those. And some of those beneficial elements for plants are essential elements for animals and human beings. So if we can just add a small amount of the biostimulants, it'll add up with the nutrient uptake, and it'll add up some of those beneficial, increase the nutritional value of the food. And oh, by the way, humic and fulvic acid. Before I forget that we're talking about nitrogen here, I'm going to go circle back a bit.
Okay.
Humic and fulvic acid doesn't have nitrogen in it. They're not a source of nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
But they stimulate the plant to make enzymes that improve the uptake of nutrients, including nitrate nitrogen. I don't know if you knew that. I always think of it, it helps take up the iron and the trace elements and the transition metals, but it also improves the uptake of nitrogen. So if you had that with your microbes, they're making some nitrogen. Those biostimulants are aiding with the uptake of that nitrogen. So again, reduce the amount. It's not how much you give it, it's how much the plant can use at any given time.
Good advice. And on that note, I want to make one statement. Food is actually medicine. Plants are actually medicine. And it's medicine that we're consuming that our body, we don't even know what it's doing to us. But healthy body, healthy mind, that all boils down to healthy food. So this may be a good way to call it a conversation. And next week for our viewers, we'll try to get back to the brewing and some of the things we can do on that. So I hope you have a great weekend. I appreciate your time once again. And I feel like we could do this every day.
We never run out of things to talk about, Brandon, because
Sure.
these things, it's a nice conversation, but some of these things could really have an impact on the world, helping feed the world in a more environmentally friendly way. I will make an announcement though. Next week, my class is going to be on biohydroponics, on
Okay.
this things that we're talking about today, and taking the minerals and the organic biostimulants, using them together to grow high-brix, nutrient-dense food. And if you want to learn more, just go to hydroharley.com. That's my website. I'll give you all the information you need about signing up.
Yeah, Hydro Harley. Yeah, I'm so glad you have that up and operational. We'll include that in one of our email links that we send out to all of our customers because it is very, very important that people take heed to what you're trying to do. You spent your whole life, uh, you've done the testing, the research, the trials, the errors, and we should all be very thankful you're trying to teach the rest of us what you have learned.
Mhm.
Sometimes there may not be time to have a failure. We need to know what we're doing
Right.
if things come to that point. And again, I recommend everybody take your classes, take heed to what you're saying. It has so much benefit in our cultures, our lives, our families. It's one thing we can do better. And I appreciate you helping us get to that level. I appreciate all the things you've taught me. And I look forward to good things ahead.
Okay. Well, Brandon, it's been great talking again today. Looking forward to next week. So have a great week and see you soon.
Thanks, my friend.